1. Good evening and welcome again to our second part of your literature review. Those of you that were present on Tuesday might remember that in part 1 we looked at designing your literature review. We spoke about what a literature review is and what it's not, what's the difference between conceptual frameworks and conceptual theories and literature review. We looked at how you would source relevant, up-to-date sources. I hope by this time you've established what your 5 to 10 most renowned journals are in your field so that you can use that for resources. Also that you were able to identify who's the gurus and the giants in your field, which you might want to nod or mention to. And then we also looked at strategies, how to search, how to conduct your literature review. We spoke about the different types of literature reviews you could get and could use, and depending on the scope of your study, which type of literature review might be suitable in terms of a master's, doctoral, also the time available to you. We started looking at strategies to analyze, and tonight we will be looking at part 2, where we will be looking at what are Danae, I think my slides are stuck again. I'm so sorry. Tonight we'll be looking at part 2, where we will be seeing how we are going to start writing up and possibly where we might run into challenges. I'm so sorry, I'm just struggling with my slide transitions on my side. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. All right, so tonight we're focusing on writing up and possibly some common problems and challenges that we might experience when writing up our studies. All right, so you will remember last time we had a very important principle where we said garbage in, garbage out. So I am hoping by now when you start writing up that you have quality sources that you will be using in your write-up. So the slide that you might see now is just a picture, and I will tell you through it, and there's a little emoji that also tells you the story. So it might be helpful for you to think about writing up your literature review as a story that you're going to tell your reader, which might be the examiner, or if it's for a journal, who might be the journal readers. So think about your literature review as you would tell a story to someone. The little emoji there at the bottom shows you it's crying because its phone fell into the toilet. Now that's a very short little story. But it's quite important. You know that the person is sad. Why is it sad? Because its phone fell into the toilet. And you've got a very visual picture now. You might also want to have a look. There's some very good sites that that explains to you writing a literature review by telling a research story. So like any story, a story has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, and very similar with your research review chapter. So when writing the review, the motivation and the need for the review must be clearly communicated to your reader. And depending on the approach, the final review article can be structured in a number of ways, and it will require different types of information and different levels of detail. What I want to steer you towards is, if you are doing a systematic review, please look at Prisma. I'm going to talk a bit more about Prisma in a moment, and then if you are doing an integrative review, look at the Ramses guides for communicating your literature review in these to specific types of reviews. Now, the PRISMA is a checklist that was developed for scoping and systematic reviews. It contains 20 essential reporting items and 2 optional items to include when you complete a scoping review. So this is very, very extensive and essential items that you need to report on, and it gives you, if you go through the checklist, you will find exactly what needs to be in your literature review. And even if you're not doing a scoping or a systematic review, it's still a good idea to have a look at the PRISMA to give you an idea of how to make sure that you have all the information in your write-up that the reader might need to understand your research story. So it gives you the objectives and helps to determine as well whether a systematic review of the literature is warranted. So I'm not going to go into it in depth. It is merely to give you an indication where you could find checklists so that you are quite sure that you have everything written up in your chapter. Or if you wanted to publish an article on your literature review, what the journals might expect that you include in your literature review. So just a header for you so that you can go and search the checklist. So as I mentioned in the beginning, when we talk about a research story, any type of writing in any of your chapters of your research has a basic outline, and that is that there's an introduction, there's a main body, and there's a conclusion. So typically your introduction would tell the reader which sources you consulted. Remember, we spoke on Tuesday in terms of your search engines. So that would typically be which search engines you used. What is the amount of the existing work? So you will find, for instance, if you just did a Google search, and you type in your keywords, it will give you how many hits you had. So that is what they are speaking about in terms of existing work. So even the academic search engines, once you put in your key terms and you start searching, it will give you a number of hits that you got. So you might say that I put in the keywords, postgraduate supervision and critical thinking, and it would give you the number of hits. And from that you would then extract. So you might give, it's very much like you would in your methodology, tell the reader what is your population and then what is your sample. With your literature review, your population would be your hits on your search engines, and then you would, if you look at PRISM, it would tell you that you would need to report which of those searches were relevant, how many did you use, and that would often be in your introduction, and I'll show you an example soon what that might look like. Also, the structure of your literature review. So any introduction paragraph in any chapter of your research will typically tell the reader what is the structure. It will tell the reader what they can expect, what's coming up. It would also contain the purpose of the review, and it would contextualize the elements that you're going to present. Then your main body, we'll be talking a bit later more extensively about the main body of your writing up, but yeah, you will typically find your critique of the existing works or theories, whether it's a quantitative, you use quantitative, qualitative, or thematic presentation. With your quantitative studies, you often start with dependable variables, and and then their relations. If you did more of a thematic analysis, you would start unpacking your main themes or your main areas, and then you would always in a literature review chapter have a conclusion. I might just now mention what's the difference between a summary and what is a conclusion. If you're not quite sure, please go on Google and look up what is the difference between a summary and a conclusion. In a conclusion, you bring together your main arguments or disagreements with that you found in literature, or any gaps, definitely areas for future research, plus your overall critical perspective on the topic. So just a heads up, a summary is exactly what it says. It's a summary of points. A conclusion might have a summary embedded in it, but a conclusion has these critical elements that we spoke about here. It needs to be an overall perspective, a critical perspective, where you reach certain conclusions regarding your literature review. So just a very important difference in terms of mere summaries. In a literature review chapter, we expect a conclusion. So just some general tips when writing. Those of you that have used Turnitin previously or might use it in future, you will possibly find that your literature review chapter, when you put it through Turnitin, I often find that the scores of these chapters of my students' work is often the scores that picks up the most similarities. And that happens because students don't paraphrase. You have to paraphrase the sources that you are using. It's not good enough to simply cite a source and use exactly the same words as the author. You have to paraphrase in your own words and restate the information without losing the meaning of the original source or the original author. So very importantly that you if you don't have the skill yet, then that you practice how to paraphrase. And there's some very useful videos on YouTube that you could follow that would assist you to develop the skill of paraphrasing. Also the use of summaries, but there's a very important distinction. When we use our summaries of sources that we have consulted, we focus less on the individual message and more on the main message of the source. So if you have gone through the source and made a summary, think about what is the main message that this research brought about and how it is relevant in your literature review and how you will be using it in your literature review. Also very important is to have a good vocabulary of reporting verbs, and that you have a nice variety, that you don't carry on saying that Dubé said this, Pontus said that, and everybody just says something. When I was doing, I think when I wrote my first article, I was very chuffed, and I showed it to my partner and they read the article. Obviously, they didn't know much what I was saying, but they made a very important comment that has always stuck with me. They said to me, Jeanette, you are saying this one said this one said that. When are you saying something? And that was a very good cue for me to remember that I need to use different reporting verbs, so not always just say, but also that you have a voice, and typically your voice would be in your conclusion now, where you have a say as well. So I've given you a few reporting verbs. For example, someone suggests, or someone argues, or they claim, or they point out, they think, they find, or they reported, they identified or indicated, they showed, proposed, described, discussed, give, and develop. So those are a few for you, but there's many more. So please make sure that you have a good vocabulary of reporting verbs and that you don't use the same verb over and over again. It might just put your reader to sleep. I promise that I'll give you an example of an abstract and an introduction in a literature review study. So let us have a look. This is an abstract of a paper published of a systematic review, and let's just have a look on about what they said within this abstract in terms of what we just said previously. So they start with just an overall introduction, or just to give the context. Remember, we said just now in your introduction, you want to give the reader context. So in this context, they said higher education aims for university students to produce knowledge from critical reflection of science text. Therefore, now they start giving you the purpose. And the objective, therefore, developing a deep mental representation of written information is necessary. And they carry on to give you the objective of this research was to determine, can you see the reporting verbs? Through a systematic review and a meta-analysis, the proportion of university students who gave an optimal performance at each level of reading and comprehension. So there's the objective of the study or the report. Now they tell you where they got the information from, and they tell you what type of a review they did. A systematic review of empirical studies has been limited from 2010 to March 2021. Remember last time we spoke about inclusion and exclusion criteria? Well, yeah, they've now told you what is the inclusion criteria. They're also telling you which search engines they used. They used the Web of Science, Scopus, Medline, and PsycInfo as databases. They also tell you who did the review. 2 reviewers performed the data extraction independently, and then they give you the method. A random effects model of proportion was used for the meta-analysis. All right, so your introduction, if it's an introduction to your chapter, might not have the findings, which is the section that they're now reporting on. But in this section, they also tell you from all of the hits that they had, there were 7 articles that met the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and that was their sample then that they used. And now they tell you what is their findings. Comparing reading comprehension levels, a significant higher proportion of university students have an optimal level of literature compared to the rest of the reading comprehension levels. And very importantly, they now give you a limitation here as well when they say the results have to be interpreted with caution but are a guide for future research. So in this section they give you an indication of possible limitations but also possible uses for future. And we'll talk about if you wanted to publish your literature review a bit later on. But it's very important that you, before a journal will accept a literature review, they want to be very clear what is the contribution and what is the novelty and what is the possible implications for future research. They don't want just a narrative hash of what has been done in the field. They want something unique, and that would go for any article that you ever consider publishing. You have to convince the journal of the uniqueness or the gap that you're identifying or where it's contributing to knowledge. But this should give you a good indication of what you would typically be reporting on. And you can clearly see that these authors use the PRISMA guidelines to guide them exactly what needs to be in every section. So I hope that gives you a clearer understanding and an application of some of the ideas that we worked with on Tuesday as well. So there are some generalizations that doesn't matter which type of review you used, that you would use as a guide. So you need to transparently share the process of designing the review, the method for collecting the literature, how the literature was identified, analyzed and synthesized, and now your organization that is coherent and concerning the approach and the research question. So what we are saying here is that there needs to be a logic and a coherent flow from the research, the question that you posed in the beginning, what the aim is of your literature review, and there needs to be a coherency between that and how you now are presenting your findings and your analysis that you've gone through. So in any type of a communication of your literature review, you need to be transparent in what you did, how you did it, who did it, and what you found and your conclusions. And that would be critical in any type of communication or a writing up of your literature review. What I'd like you to, or a mental map that I would like to share with you that might also help you when writing up your literature review. Some of you might know Bloom's taxonomy. It's a taxonomy that is often used in education. And Bloom has a taxonomy that goes from in a pyramid, from a very basic level and then goes up the pyramid. Some of you might be aware of Maslow's hierarchy, where you go from basic to more advanced. Now, Bloom has a similar taxonomy, and it's very helpful when we think about Bloom's taxonomy in terms of higher order thinking skills. So the acronym for higher order thinking skills is HOTS. So keep on asking yourself, am I busy with HOTS? And what I'd like to share with you now is a practical application. When we spoke on Tuesday, we often referred to you need to analyze, you need to compare and contrast. So I hope with what I'm sharing with you now, you can get a better idea of the application. How do we go about demonstrating the application of higher order thinking skills in our literature review? So I've just got a picture to show you what Bloom's taxonomy and what the pyramid looks like. So what you would have in Bloom is that you would start with lower order thinking skills, and they would be at the bottom. And what Bloom says in his taxonomy is that it's very important that the basis needs to be covered, because you can't get to the pinnacle if the bottom haven't been addressed. So in Bloom's taxonomy, at the bottom of the pyramid, the basic thinking skills or lower order thinking skills would be knowledge or to remember. And at this level, you would often find, when we present mere knowledge to the reader, it would be when we give the reader facts that we found, our basic concepts, when we define or give a list, or we state certain aspects. That would be on the knowledge level. And this is often when we are only describing, we're only stating facts, or we're only describing basic concepts. That would be on the lower level of thinking skills. When we move up one level, we want to take our reader along with us to help them and us understand. So this is typically where we can classify concepts We can describe aspects, we can explain, and this would usually entail understanding. So usually reporting simple descriptions for understanding. So these are your lower order thinking skills. And they are necessary, but we cannot stop there. What we need now is our higher order thinking skills, and they are application, analysis, evaluate, and possibly in a PhD also create. Now, on the application level, we use information in new situations, or you can help the reader see applications where you tell them how certain concepts or findings have been applied in other studies. So yeah, you could explain and interpret abstract concepts. So on this level, you would have concrete concepts, the bottom, and now you're starting with more abstract concepts. So an abstract concept, if I now needed to think about an abstract concept, for instance, power would maybe be a more abstract concept. So we could say there is social aspects, there is economic aspects, but the power relationship between them, then I'm moving towards a level of abstraction, and this is usually also in the apply category. Moving up one step, when we now tell you you need to analyze the sources that you've consulted, critically analyze it. This is where you would now analyze what are the merits, what are the gaps. This is typically where you would compare information within an article or between articles, where you find what is similar, what is different, where you start questioning, and possibly also, you know, where you start questioning and testing certain aspects. On the second level, higher order level from the top, would be evaluate, and this is where you usually use a very persuasive writing position that tells you and where you start justifying decisions, where you argue and you defend or you support or you critique certain aspects. And then at the very pinnacle of this taxonomy, it is where you start producing original or new work. That's where you start creating. Typically at this level, you have a synthesis of information, and you create a meta level at this pinnacle. This is usually where you would end up in a PhD, where you now need to produce new or original work. So this is often where you have your unique contribution. This is when you've gone through all of these steps and you've reached the pinnacle of higher order thinking and reporting and meta level analysis and understanding, is at this pinnacle where you start to create. I'm just going to show you more specifically and just give you some examples again. So right at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, remember, we had remember or knowledge. Now this is where you as a writer presents information from a source text so that the reader can understand and comprehend. So when we provide knowledge, it is often in the form of defining, for instance, key concepts or variables. It is where we provide summaries. It could be in the form of tables, diagrams. You can also, in your reporting, when you set up a table, you can maybe do a cross-table comparison between articles and give a tabled form of basic knowledge and basic information that you found. So that's at the bottom level. Going up one level, comprehension. This is where we want to help our reader understand. And yeah, we want to translate, interpret, extrapolate meanings. And you need to explain the relevance of your source text, interpret the significance, provide an interpretation or a descriptive piece of writing. And on an honors level, you could potentially be on this level, but usually we expect just something more than mere descriptions. If you want to publish, definitely you're going to need to use your higher order thinking skills. So on this level, you would summarize, describe, paraphrase, and interpret to help the reader understand. On the next level, we're now looking at application. And here you show the reader how the knowledge that you have discovered or research that has been done, how that knowledge has been used over time. So in this, you could explain concepts, explain why they are essential to your study. For example, where has it been used in different studies, in different contexts, in possibly in different possibly in different conceptual frameworks or in different theories. When we look at analysis, so analysis means that we break down. It's from the Greek or Latin word analyne. It means breaking up. Now, analysis, to give you a nice metaphor, you know, when the boys and young men, and often older men, take a car or a motorbike's engine apart. It's very easy to take it apart. Those of you who've gone through the process will often discover it's much more difficult when they try and put it back together again, and there's often a spare part that doesn't fit. Now, if you keep that in mind, that is what analysis would be, and that's what you would be doing when you review your literature. You take apart, you take data apart, and then you explain the parts and their relationship between them, looking across text, comparing and contrasting, grouping and classifying, or then coming up with themes. So I've given you just a quick example at the top where we can say this author, for instance, identified 3 specific characteristics or components of this concept. However, someone else identified an additional 5, whereas Dory only mentions 2. Now you've taken a part and you've got, for instance, at the end, say 5 or 6 or 7 crucial components. So you've taken them apart. And now you need to explain to the reader what is the relationship between them, compare them, contrast them, maybe group them in your own way and classify them, or start putting or looking at them from a thematic perspective. Now, often where we get stuck is when we do the synthesis. So analysis is usually easy. The synthesis, putting it back together, is often a bit more tricky. And I find that students are often very good at taking things apart and analyzing, but they often get stuck at this step and are not able to then synthesize information and put it back again and look at relationships across text and compare and contrast. So that's what you would typically do in the analysis phase. And then in the synthesis that I've just mentioned, you put them back together again with, very important, and here's the key word, with insight. Now you are using meta-level thinking. So it's not just putting, you know, when we spoke on Tuesday, we said it's not just a rehashing and anecdotal pages and pages of anecdotal information. Once we've analyzed them, when we synthesize our writing, we need to put it back together again with insight. And often in this insight or this new creation, that's where, remember, I'm using the word create, a new creation. This is often where we have our unique contributions or our unique insights or our unique aha moments. Oh, but I see now that I've put it together that this is missing, or I could add this. So, for example, you could have literature shows that this concept has 3 essential characteristics. These characteristics are shaped by economic and. So at your synthesis level, you are coming up with new insights. So the first part here would give us the characteristics, but now the insight comes when we say it's shaped by. So can you see that we're just moving up one level further to bring about something new or a new insight that we have discovered? So at our evaluation level, this is where you can also start making judgments. So at our evaluation level, you could, in one aspect, evaluate your own processes and your own review and how you've done. Please remember that you are a master's student, you are a doctoral candidate or still a student, so you may still learn. And I often value, when I evaluate dissertations and theses, when a student also tells me what didn't maybe work out perfectly, or and having said that, what they've learned from it. So in your evaluation, you can now also start evaluating your process. Now I have done this in the study, maybe what could I have done different? Or if you do an evaluation of your findings, what is missing? And what are the possible limitations? And but here it's very, very important, maybe not only here, but whenever you make a judgment, that you do so by logic and reasoning. Very often I find that students would make a statement. And a statement, to arrive at a statement or a conclusion is perfect if there has been a logical argument with evidence that led you to that statement or a conclusion. But simply to make a statement without any logical argumentation, or if you are using someone else's conclusion or statement, then you would need to reference them. But when you reach to your own conclusions and your own judgments, please do so with a clear logical argument where you substantiate your statements with evidence before you reach a conclusion. So very, very important with the judgments that you make. Either you need to argue them with evidence, or if you are using a judgment or a claim by another author or their study, then please reference it as such. So in your evaluation, you can often now find what are the potential limitations, what are the gaps that you've maybe found in your as you reviewed your literature. And this is often your evaluation would be in your conclusion of your literature review. So I hope with these applications or demonstrations that you maybe now have a clearer idea where you use which higher order thinking skills and how you maybe could apply them when you are writing up your literature review. So when we typically assess the quality of the literature review, I would assess and ask myself, has the writer reported in depth? So in depth would be that you tell me exactly what your question was, what the purpose of the review was, how did you execute it? I want to see the execution and the write-up of that so that I can evaluate the rigor of your literature review. I also, as a reader, need this information should I want to replicate for any reason your literature review. I could maybe also use it to replicate it and see if I get the same, reach the same conclusions. Maybe I want to replicate it with a different set of, or in a different field, for instance, and make references. Or maybe you at a later stage want to do a longitudinal review and check, in 5 years' time, do you have similar or different findings, or did things change in your field? So very, very important that there is an excellent write-up of the methods and that I can judge how rigorously you stayed true to those. And then very importantly is the criteria of usefulness. Does it have any practical or theoretical use or contribution? And that is the key thing that you need to be able to demonstrate if you wanted to publish your literature review in a journal, for instance, going forward. So I would, the first one in terms of depth, I want to see if you have an in-depth knowledge of your field. Do you demonstrate that you know the field? Do you know the main contributors to the field? And were you able to do an in-depth analysis and a critical review of your sources? So we've often during this evening now spoke periodically about publishing your literature review. So as we've said, your contribution, what is new, noteworthy, different. Example, you could, for instance, as I mentioned now, create a timeline for analyzing, or you could possibly through this predict where a field is heading. Those would be excellent contributions. Or you can do a comparison of different related terms or construct that can serve as a base for new theory development. That would be a useful contribution. Or through that you can identify actual knowledge gaps in previous research and maybe now propose a way forward in terms of what needs to happen in with regarding to either knowledge or in terms of practice in your specific field. But before we can publish, we need to find a home for our publishing. So review again the 5 top journals that you identified in your field and identify on the journal's home page if they consider the following. Do they consider reviews, either scoping, systematic or integrative reviews? I can tell you now that journals won't accept just a narrative descriptive review. It would need to be either scoping, systematic or integrative, also depending on your field. Or sometimes the journal on their homepage would say that they accept conceptual articles. Now, a conceptual article is, for instance, if you have gone through your entire review and you've come up, for instance, with new concepts for a theory, or you have used a theoretical framework and out of that you have maybe unpacked different studies or in a different field, how this may relate in another field. So very important is that you, as you look for a journal to publish in, that you will, on their homepage, usually they would tell you whether they accept accept review articles, or so they might sometimes refer to conceptual articles. So I've just done a quick search in one of my high-ranking journals that I use and publish in, and that's Higher Education Research and Development. I've just copied from their homepage, where they give their aims and objectives of the journal. They often have the information here, and they state that they consider empirical, theoretical, philosophical and historical articles, specifically in the higher education field. But there you can get your cue that they do accept theoretical or philosophical articles. So often your literature review could be of a philosophical nature, for instance, or have a philosophical argument to it. So now I know, yes, they do. Then they give me another heads up. They say we welcome research that interrogates challenges and reflects upon pressing issues in higher education, drawing on a range of theoretical frameworks. Now I'm getting a cue, okay, that they also do consider theoretical frameworks and therefore also possibly conceptual articles. Now they tell you what is the criteria that we've already spoken about. They tell you all articles must propose a fresh critical insight into the area being addressed. And now, very, very importantly, someone asked the question on Tuesday evening, is it okay to just use local journals, national journals, publish nationally? And yes, you can certainly do. But this journal, that's a A-rated or Q1 quintile 1 journal, specifically tells you that all their articles, whether it's theoretical, conceptual or empirical articles, need to be framed for an international audience. Now, one can argue that, you know, if you have a context, a South African context, you could possibly use it, but then you would need to tell the international audience what's the relevance of that for them. What can they learn from your contextual either literature review or contextual empirical research? You would need to frame it for an international audience. So very important, you know, when you are already considering sources, and that's why I said it's so important to, from the start, aim high. Aim for these journals, because if you start reading in these journals, you would know what kind of work they publish. You would get examples of how they do it. And very interesting in this specific journal, they ask you that they actually tell you to review former issues of this journal and, where possible, engage with previously published articles as part of preparing your manuscript for the submission. So they are actually giving you a heads up to say that you need to look within this journal for former issues that maybe addressed a similar theme or a similar scope, and that you actually use it. Some journals would be as forthright as telling you you need to cite at least 3 sources from their journal. Now, there's a whole discourse around the ethics of doing that, but there are journals that will tell you specifically that you need to cite from their journal, not exclusively, but definitely use their journal as a source. So you can now go and have a look at the journals when you start looking for journals to publish your literature review. And you can often find this information on their homepage, on their aims or scope of the journal, and you might find the information there whether they will accept theoretical papers. Some will be specific. They'll tell you they accept systematic or integrative reviews. In the health sciences, rapid reviews are often accepted. Remember, we said a rapid review gives us a quick scope or overview of the field or phenomenon that we're looking at. And that might give us an indication whether we need to do a systematic review. But in the health and health-related fields, they often do scoping reviews. Say, for instance, as a quick guide to see what is out there. For instance, what are the prophylactic measures for a certain condition? And so scoping reviews in certain fields are quite prominent, and you are able to publish a scoping review as well. So I hope that gives you an indication where to check for journals and how to look whether they would accept a literature review or a specific type of a review. We've done very well this evening. We getting to the last slide, and just some hints where we often find common problems in the literature review. So as an examiner, these are often things that I come across, and just to give you a heads up to look out for these aspects. So common problems are often over-reliance on low-quality sources. And the debates when we had the Q&A on Tuesday evening, where many students were either maybe panicking because their sources are not recent within the, say, for instance, the last 5 years, and you might be panicking and thinking, oh my goodness, do I have to repeat everything? I'm not saying that you need to repeat anything, but and I'm also not saying that you cannot use all the sources, but over-reliance on dated or low quality sources is often a common problem. And definitely, if you want to go towards publishing your literature review, please check the quality of your sources. Make sure that the sources that you use are relevant, that they are, for instance, in journal articles, that they are peer-reviewed, and that they are from reputable journals, so that we can trust what we are reading and the conclusions that you are making. Often a lack of landmark or seminal literature. Just a heads up, there was a question on Tuesday as well. How do I identify seminal literature, or how do I identify the key authors in my field, or the key authors in the topic that I'm looking at? If you go to the academic search engines, such as the Web of Science or Scopus, you would find that when you access the Web of Science platform or the Scopus platform, and you start doing your search and put in your key terms, you can, some of these landing sites will give you, for instance, they will give you that this A, B, C, D, and E article, and they'll give you the number of citations. And they often go from the highest citation scores to the lowest. So if you find an article that's been cited 3,050 times versus an article that's possibly been cited 10 times, you can now see and start identifying which sources, you know, are used a lot, or which are you know, really either hot topics or hot sources. So you can, when you access those, you can do it on Google Scholar as well, but please, Google Scholar, the students use Google Scholar because it's easy. But please also use the academic search engines, because that is where, you know, the Web of Science only focuses on academic literature. Scopus, for instance, and these are reputable search engines as well. So you might find when you do such a search, some of them you can press a button where it asks you most cited, or you will also find that you will start seeing similar authors being cited over and over again. So just to come back to one of the questions. So please try that when you want to identify landmark or seminal literature. And seminal literature will often have a older date to it. So they might be not seen as dated sources, but they are seen as seminal text. Now, I once had published an article and I used a seminal text. And then one of the reviewers asked me, why am I using this text? So in order to answer the question, I literally had to say and write, this is a seminal text by this author. So sometimes you need to be as upfront as actually telling the reader that this is a seminal text. They might not be in your field, so please always know that the examiner isn't always within your field, and that's why you need to extensively report on what you did and how you did it, because you can't take it that they know your field. They might be from outside of your field. Then a lack of current literature, and I think I've debated and related the point now to its maximum. Please look at the currency of your literature. Lack of transparency. When I start reading your literature review and I have to wonder about things, I have to wonder about what search engines you used. I have to wonder about the inclusion criteria. I have to wonder about who did the review. I have to wonder about how you checked for rigor. If I start wondering too much, I start doubting too much. So a lack of transparency. As soon as your reader needs to work too hard to try and identify information, they become very subjective. So please be very transparent, please be very rigorous and very thorough so that you don't exhaust your examiner. I must say, I find that the literature reviews when I examine thesis or dissertations is one of the chapters that I usually dread because it often puts me to sleep. So what you don't want is your reader going to sleep. So please keep it interesting. Please keep your reader engaged by the way you write. Often there is a huge problem with selection bias. And what I mean by that is that as I read your review, I begin to realize that you only use sources that goes along with your point of view, that you only look at one side of a story or only one side of an argument. So if you, for instance, are writing about the mental health crisis in the world today, and you only focus on that it's the problem isn't so big as they say it is on the news, and your only argument is to show one side, that it's not as big as it is. And I can clearly see that you completely ignore another side of the argument or another point of view. So there's also selection bias in the types of articles that you use, or can be selection or other forms of bias, such as only certain points of view, only certain perspectives. And where I often pick this up, there is often when we look at authors from the northern hemisphere, they have a complete bias into, well, not bias, they absolutely ignore the global south. And that might be a form of bias. So did you only, for instance, include sources from the global north? Did you, where maybe your field or your topic would have a very strong voice from the global south as well, or east or west, for instance. So please make sure that you check your biases when you are selecting and when you are arguing certain points. I often find it problematic when there's descriptions instead of integration and synthesis, and I think we've spoken about that a lot. Another thing is when there's irrelevant or unfocused content. And I mentioned on Tuesday evening as well, is that you need to keep focused. There's a lot of content, you're going to do a lot of reading, and it's very easy to become distracted. And it's very easy to become unfocused in your writing. So as soon as I start getting an idea, but you're going walkabout, you know, you're not staying on topic, you are not staying with the aim or the purpose of your review, that you are including irrelevant information, I start becoming very uncomfortable. And that's why it's so important to use, for instance, things like mind mapping, where you map it back to the central issue all the time, and that you check and ask yourself the whole time, am I still on, is my focus still in the right place? Critically looking at every piece of information that you put down. Is this information relevant to what I'm doing? Is it necessary? Does it deserve a place and a space in my literature review? So that you critically ask yourself through the entire process, am I focusing? Am I on point? Is this relevant? Is this needed? And because that's another way that you can really get your reader to pull their hair out of their heads. Okay, so please stay focused. Another point, poor chapter structure and layout. But I'm sure by now that you are all absolute stars and that you would know what your chapter structure and layout would be. Very important. When I start getting a sense that there's plagiarism or poor referencing, when I can clearly see that you have used, and people, it's very easy to check. The examiners and supervisors read a lot. You read a lot of student work, and you can clearly see where, you know, every one of us has a unique style of writing. And when you start picking up that the style of writing is now very different, or the person was battling to write earlier, and now you have these very sleek and very polished paragraphs, you already start getting, you know, uneasy about it. And it's very easy to just copy and paste a paragraph that you suspect and just put it into Google, and it's very easy to pick up that it's been copied. So please go back to the slide on paraphrasing. Go and look on YouTube. There's very nice YouTubes, how to paraphrase, how to make sure that you're not plagiarizing, make sure that your referencing is correct, that you reference sources, that you reference ideas, that you reference your claims, and so it's you know, it's a no. Please don't be caught out for plagiarism. And then the last, and this is a very delicate matter, is poor academic writing. You know, we weren't all born writers. There's some of us that do better at writing, and some of us find it very difficult. And academic writing is a very specialized form of writing, and that's one aspect where you only get better the more you do it. So please, I would urge you to go on courses for academic writing. More than once. You can always get better. Please write. You will often, you know, my family thinks they're still very perplexed when I tell them I've been writing all day, and then they'll ask me how much did you write, and I might be writing all day and only use a paragraph of what I've written all day. And that's typically where, you know, you start writing, you polish your writing, you rewrite. There's many books on academic writing, but if you, as stretched in terms of reading so much as I often do. I really find, you know, sometimes I just watch a quick clip on YouTube, or and you can just easily, you know, start getting nice tips and start polishing it up. Again, I go back to what I said on Tuesday evening. It's not a linear process. The literature review that you read in articles or that you read in dissertations or theses that are complete didn't look so in the very first draft. You'll probably have quite a large number of drafts before your literature review chapter is written up and it is polished and your supervisor gives it the green light to go ahead. So writing, academic writing, is something that you learn by doing. Very few of us get it right at the first time, and you always keep on doing better. And just another tip on writing, please try to focus on writing, even if it's just 10 minutes a day. Find a time of the day that works best for you, whether it's I write between 3 and 4 in the morning because that's the only time that I don't get bothered. I'm not saying you need to do that. Some work better at night, but please keep engaged with your research and your literature review, especially. If you let it go for a week or a month, you will find that the time that it takes you to now re-engage in where you were last time and need to re-engage in your writing takes up possibly a half a day before you can actually start moving forward. So just a tip, what I do, if I've been writing something and my hour is finished, or however much time I allocated, I just write myself a little note. This is where I am now. When I continue tomorrow, I need to look at this or that or the following. And then tomorrow morning when I connect, I already pick up my train of thought and I can carry on. But if I've left it for a week or 2 weeks or a month, the ability of you then to pick up the strands, it takes a lot of time. So if you can, please, with any academic writing, try and do it regularly. And that might also help you to engage in the with your literature. I'm going to stop presenting in terms of this presentation. I just want to see if I can get onto Danae. For some reason, when I go on this, there I've got the Q&As. There was a request on Tuesday that you wanted to see or have a quick discussion on the outline of your chapters. Some of the students were busy with the outline of their chapters. So I've got a few minutes. I just want to see if you'll just excuse me for a minute. I just want to see if I can find the PowerPoint of this. Please just excuse me, and I'll just see if I can pick it up. And otherwise, I'll just talk you through the outline of your chapters, as some of you were busy using or were at a point where you need on Tuesday night, and then I can quickly just run through it for you. Let me just see if I can bring that up on my main screen and slideshow. And from the beginning, I'm just going to go out here and share these with you. Okay, so I hope you can see the chapter outline slides. It's not many slides, and I'm going to quickly go through that we just have some time for questions and answers. So a chapter outline is there's a generic structure for most dissertations and theses. And it would depend on your field, but it's usually divided into at least 4 or 5 chapters, including your introduction and conclusion chapter for a dissertation, or 6 or more chapters for a thesis. So the most common dissertation structures in the social sciences and in the science is chapter 1, which is usually an introduction to your topic, and I'll go through them in a bit more detail. Chapter 2 is usually your literature review. Chapter 3 is usually your methodology, or it might be design and methods. Or chapter 4 is usually an overview of your results. And chapter 5, usually a discussion of the results, but sometimes you may have the results and the discussion in one chapter, and then you'll have your conclusion chapter. So usually in a master's study, you will have these 5 or 6 chapters. In a PhD chapter, there will be an additional chapter, and that would be your unique contribution. But if we just went through them quickly, chapter 1 would usually have your introduction. All chapters have an introduction, body, and a conclusion or a summary. So chapter 1 usually has your introduction, then it gives you a background to the problem. And where will you find the information to the background of your problem? You'll find it in your literature review. Then you have a statement of the problem. Your statement of your problem will also emanate from the literature review. You have your purpose of your study, your research questions, your research design, your research methods, or you might just have one heading that says research methodology. That would include your data collection and data analysis. But please remember, chapter 1 is an overview of your study. So you won't be discussing your design and methods in detail. You will just tell the reader, yeah, in a paragraph maybe, what design did you use, what data collection methods did you use, and what data analysis methods did you use, and you will refer them to your chapter 3, where you will have a complete discussion on these aspects. You might also have your ethical considerations under this section, or you might have the ethical considerations in full in your chapter 3. Then you'll have the significance of your study, definition of terms, assumptions and delimitations. Please, not limitations. It's too early to say what the limitations are. That would come at the end. It's your delimitations. And then your summary. I like my students to have a summary at the end of chapter 1, not a conclusion, because there's nothing that can bring you to a conclusion. You have a summary. However, in chapter 2, you'll have a conclusion. So chapter 2 is the review of your literature, or your literature review chapter. As we've said now, you have your introduction, your search description, your conceptual or theoretical frameworks if you have, your review of your research according to variables or themes, and in this chapter you have a conclusion. Chapter 3, your research methodology or your design and methods, again an introduction. You would have your research design, your research questions or hypotheses, your population, sample or sampling, your instrumentation, your data collection, data analysis, your rigor or your trustworthiness in qualitative studies, and here again you have a summary. Then in your chapter 4, you have usually in a quantitative study your results, in a qualitative study your findings. So yeah, again, an introduction, you have your findings organized by questions, hypotheses or themes, and in this chapter you could reach a conclusion, or you might only have your summary again. Then chapter 5 is your discussion. You could sometimes have your discussion within the findings chapter, or you can have it as a separate chapter. Or in qualitative studies, you might have a literature control. And again, a summary. And then if you have a doing a PhD, then after this chapter, it would be your unique contribution. So if you developed a model or a theory or conceptual framework or guidelines or developed a program, that would be in the chapter after the discussion of your findings. And then your final chapter is your summary, implications and outcomes. Again, an introduction, summary of the findings, conclusions. These are usually organized in terms of your question or your hypotheses or the themes. Here is the place for your limitations at the end of the study. Suggestions for future research. You might have suggestions for practice as well. And then you have your conclusion to your chapter. Okay, so you will see in this chapter, there's two conclusions. There's a conclusion related to your question hypotheses. There's a conclusion, but then there is a chapter conclusion as well. All right, so I hope that this has given you a quick overview of your chapter outlines, and that that's maybe helped those of you that are busy with your chapters at the moment and might need such information for now. But there is a full session based on that, and I think I'm also possibly doing that session a bit later on. All right, so I see there's been a few questions. Let's just start from Anonymous. What are other academic search engines available except Google Scholar? I think I've mentioned those. That would be Scopus, the Web of Science, and Academic Edu. There's many. Please go to the library site. And you can, there's a great number in the example that I showed you as well. You could find some, but please visit the library site as well, or you can access via the Web of Science or Scopus as well. Can you list and discuss policies under your literature review? Yes, you could. You could. So you might have a section that discusses previous research, and there's a section that maybe only pertains to policies, but you could definitely use that as well. How can one make a judgment on high, low quality sources? And that's why I said it's important that you look at or establish top 5 to 10 journals in your in your review. You could do a Google search, top journals for instance, a certain field. It could give you that indication. Otherwise, you can ask your librarian to do a search for you. And then there is a index that gives you the quintile. So if you go on, if you have identified a journal and you want to see what its standing is, go to the journal homepage. It might give you a H index or a standing score. So the higher the index, the more reputable. And then there is also a search engine that will indicate quintile. So just Google quintile journals or quintile 1 journals. That would be the top journal, and it goes up to quintile 4, which are they are ranked. But you can try and find your quality sources there. Can I use media articles like reports, newspapers? Yes, definitely, but not exclusively. So there is a place for that, but remember our literature review, what is the aim of that? So often media articles, it depends on the type of study that you have. So if your study is in media studies, for instance, then it would make sense that you would use this type of media. But that they would also, I would say not exclusively, but it would depend on your type of study that you have. Sure, I see there's 15, but oh, okay, all right, I've gone to the lower ones. Oh, you're very lucky. Okay, let's go to the first one. Linda asked in literature review, when writing your own insight or argument, how should you cite? Now that's, so you don't cite yourself, Linda. You would argue when you get to your own insight or argue, you know, so you would provide evidence and you would write in an argumentative format, and therefore through that argument you can reach a conclusion. And so you don't need to cite yourself. Your own insight comes through your argumentation, providing insight as to how you reached a certain conclusion. When do you bring your own arguments in the literature review? After data collection or from the start? Usually I would say, you know, we first present an argument and first present the evidence from other literature, other sources, other discussions, and then once you start analyzing, synthesizing, you can definitely at that stage bring in your argument and then your statement and conclusion that you reach. Or you can state a certain position and then argue the position, for instance. When writing the literature review, is it acceptable to raise your own arguments or viewpoints related to the subject matter based on your own experience? Yes, you can relate your own experience. What I often do with that is I do that in my chapter 1. So what I've done previously is in my master's study, for instance, I under my problem statement, I related my own experience and then backed it up with research and relevant studies, and also then argued why I said there was a gap based on my experience and then based on what I found in literature. So there's definitely a place for that. In the literature review chapter, do you go straight into the introduction section, or can you brief? Yeah, no, you can give a brief chapter overview. In any chapter, it's worthwhile giving the reader an idea as to where you'll be going. Just refer to one of the earlier slides that I used. Thank you, Prof. On sources, you have only referred to electronic online databases, under which category can we print official documents like policies, strategic plans, reports, acts. They usually, for the most, also, or acts are definitely online as well. Reports, if you have a physical report from a company, that's fine. Then just you know, you would then, if it's company reports, for instance, and you have a hard copy of them, then just reference it as such. But so there are times, for instance, that students in the health sciences would work with patient files, and those would be hard copies. Then you just reference it as such. Is it possible for an article to be published on or in different journals? Yes, you can, but you would need to have, so you can, for instance, split your literature review in more than one article. But each article will need to stand independently, have its own objective and its own contribution, but you can definitely get more than one article from a literature review. I hope I've understood you well. How do I integrate the thoughts of different authors? That's typically when you would say, you know, that author A says this, and the following author says something different. The third author maybe has a different view or has an additional component. So then you start writing an integrative paragraph. So you don't have a paragraph where A says this, B says so, and C says this. Uniquely within a paragraph or within a topic, you want to have an integrated view of different authors, and that would then refer to an integrative writing of different authors. But also go and Google if you Google how to integrate thoughts from different authors, I'm sure you'll get some unique hits as well. In a systematic literature review, do we accept reviewed book chapters? Well, if that's part of your inclusion criteria, you can have it as an inclusion criteria. Some might say that they're only using journal articles, but if you want to and can argue why you're using book chapters, then yes, by all means, it can be part of your inclusion criteria. What are the benefits of publishing articles? It's enormous. And so if you are considering a career in the academia, that's how you build up academic capital beyond your master's and PhD. That's the way you get promotion, by publishing. If you're not considering a academic career and you just need a master's or a PhD for whatever reason, and you don't want to publish out of that, then it's fine. You don't need to. The current for a PhD at UNISA, the requirements have changed, and they now require you to have published from your PhD, so that's a requirement now, or to at least have an article that's been submitted for publication. So on a PhD level, it's not negotiable. And also the other benefits of publishing, is that you are disseminating the knowledge further, either to the academic community or to practice. So remember, very few people are actually going to read your master's or your thesis. It might be the examiner and your supervisor, and that maybe a family member if they're very brave, but that's probably the sum total, and maybe somewhere a student here or there. But that's the only people that's going to read a dissertation or a thesis. So writing and publishing, whether it is academic articles or communicating your findings via blogs or talks or over media, radio, those are all ways of disseminating your findings and your research. So it doesn't just have to be academic articles, but you also have a commitment to the community that you are in, to also disseminate and communicate your findings. But if you're heading for an academic career, that's your capital that you have. Okay, and I think I've now gone through most of those. Okay. What is the relationship between the literature review from the research proposal and the full one? So your literature review and your proposal is kind of a overview, just to, you can maybe say it's nearly like a scoping review. It's in a smaller scope. So similar, it would just not be as extensive. So for a proposal, it's just to give the committees an idea that you know where your study is situated, that you've been able to identify and justify why your research is needed from literature, and that you can justify possible gaps and how you intend meeting those gaps. So it's a smaller scope. It's often not as extensive. If you're in the College of Human Sciences, they've got a form that you fill in, and the entire form is a maximum of 20 to 25 pages. You can imagine your literature review, that would be, about 3 or 4 pages. That's it. So it's a very concise description. It doesn't, at a proposal stage, need to be in so much depth as the full literature chapter. Okay. There's the question I asked if you use the literature review matrix or anything. I find the matrix tedious. Yes, some fields, some schools expect a matrix. I do agree with you. It can be very tedious and very exhausting. So please just check. In some disciplines, they expect you to do a matrix. I am not. I don't require it from my students, and not in my school or not in my department in any event. But it can be useful to some. I personally don't use it a lot. I also don't expect my students, but there are certain fields that require it. And it's sometimes is the expectation, but I do agree with you that the review matrix can be very extensive, but some people love it. You know, it gives them an idea, or, you know, they can control, they can see where they're going. So it has its benefits. If you find it tedious and it's not required, then I don't see that it's a must to have it. I've also not had any examiner that insisted that that be done in that way or presented in that way. Okay, so I think we have just about gone through all of the questions that I see that have been published. From my side then, I'm going to bid you a farewell for now. It's been lovely to engage with you all through your questions. I hope that I've given you some thoughts, some things to ponder on, some tips and some skills, and that this has been an appetizer for you to go and further your reading, to go and look more, to start writing. And most of all, I'll always tell you, please enjoy the journey. Research can be fun. It can be exciting. Don't start with a negative mindset and think, oh, this is bad, this is hard. It is lonely. Please reach out to others, but it can be exciting. It can be worthwhile. It can be stimulating. So put in the hours, do deep and thorough work, and the rewards are absolutely worth it. Please take care until we meet the next time. Bye-bye.